I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel
Have you ever wondered what happens when the person who has spent nearly 3 decades protecting Princess Diana's memory finally decides he has seen enough? According to supporters of a growing royal narrative, that moment may have arrived. For years, Charles Spencer remained largely silent while debates surrounding Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Diana's legacy dominated headlines across the world. He rarely entered public disputes. He rarely commented on royal controversies, and he almost never allowed himself to become part of the story. But according to many commentators, recent developments allegedly pushed Diana's younger brother to a point where silence was no longer an option. And if the reports are accurate, his response sent shockwaves through royal circles and left Prince Harry facing a situation he never expected. According to supporters of the narrative, understanding the significance of Charles Spencer's alleged intervention requires understanding who he is and why his voice carries such extraordinary weight whenever Diana is discussed. To much of the world, he is Diana's younger brother, the 9th Earl Spencer, the custodian of Althorp, and one of the few remaining people who knew Diana long before she became Princess of Wales. But according to many royal observers, he represents something even more important. He is the guardian of Diana's private legacy, the part of her story that exists beyond palace walls and beyond public mythology. According to the narrative, Charles Spencer's role in protecting Diana's memory began long before today's controversies. Following Diana's tragic death in 1997, millions around the world watched as her funeral became one of the most emotional public events in modern history. Yet among all the speeches delivered during that period, few remain as memorable as Charles Spencer's address. Standing before a global audience, he spoke not only as a grieving brother, but also as someone determined to ensure that Diana's story would not be controlled entirely by institutions or public narratives. Supporters of the narrative argue that this moment became the foundation for everything he has done since. What makes this part of the story especially important is the promise many observers believe Charles made to himself after Diana's death. According to supporters of the narrative, he became committed to preserving her memory on his own terms, protecting her dignity, protecting her story, and protecting the parts of her life that belong to family rather than public consumption. Whether spoken aloud or not, commentators argue that this mission has shaped nearly every major decision he has made concerning Diana's legacy. According to many royal commentators, nowhere is this commitment more visible than at Althorp. Long before Diana became a global icon, Althorp was her childhood home. It was where she grew up, formed early memories, and experienced life before the pressures of royal duty transformed everything. Today, it remains one of the most emotionally significant locations associated with her story. More importantly, it is also where Diana was laid to rest. Supporters of the narrative frequently point out that her burial site was deliberately chosen to provide privacy, dignity, and peace, qualities that many believe were often denied to her during life. According to the story, Charles Spencer has treated that responsibility with extraordinary seriousness. For nearly 30 years, he has remained the gatekeeper of Diana's private world. The photographs, the family memories, the personal records, and the stories that never became public property. While documentaries, books, interviews, and television programs repeatedly revisited Diana's life, Charles allegedly maintained a clear distinction between public history and private family legacy. Supporters of the narrative argue that this distinction explains why recent developments attracted so much attention. Because if Charles Spencer was finally speaking out, observers assumed something important must have changed. According to many commentators, that change allegedly emerged gradually rather than suddenly. At first, there were isolated moments, public appearances that generated discussion, comparisons that attracted media attention, and recurring references to Diana's story that some observers interpreted as tributes, while others viewed quite differently. For years, Charles reportedly remained silent through all of it. Yet supporters of the narrative claim that silence should never be mistaken for indifference. They argue that he was watching carefully, evaluating developments from a distance, and deciding where the line between remembrance and exploitation should ultimately be drawn. What makes the situation especially intriguing is that the controversy was not initially about Harry, nor was it initially about the royal family. According to supporters of the narrative, it centered on a much larger question. Who has the right to define Diana's legacy? Who has the right to tell her story? And where should the boundary exist between honoring someone's memory and using that memory to advance a modern narrative? According to many royal observers, those questions would soon become impossible to avoid. Because as discussions surrounding Meghan Markle, media projects, and Diana's image allegedly intensified, Charles Spencer reportedly began seeing patterns that made him increasingly uncomfortable. And according to supporters of the narrative, what happened next would transform him from a silent observer into an active participant in one of the most controversial royal debates of recent years, setting the stage for a confrontation that would place Harry directly between his wife's ambitions and the man who has spent decades protecting his mother's legacy. According to supporters of the narrative, the controversy allegedly began gaining momentum when royal observers started noticing what they believed was an increasing connection between Meghan Markle's public image and the enduring legacy of Princess Diana. At first, the similarities appeared subtle. A reference during an interview here, a comparison in a newspaper article there, a piece of jewelry associated with Diana appearing during a major public appearance. Individually, none of these moments seem particularly significant. Yet according to many commentators, when viewed together, they allegedly created a pattern that attracted growing attention from both supporters and critics of the Sussexes. And according to the narrative, it was this pattern that reportedly began making Charles Spencer increasingly uncomfortable. According to supporters of the story, comparisons between Meghan and Diana emerged almost immediately after Meghan entered royal life. Both women arrived from outside traditional aristocratic circles. Both attracted extraordinary media attention. Both experienced intense public scrutiny. And both became central figures in conversations about the future of the monarchy. Because of these similarities, commentators and journalists frequently drew parallels between their experiences. Some viewed the comparisons as natural, others viewed them as exaggerated, yet the comparisons continued growing regardless. According to many royal observers, one of the most discussed examples involved jewelry once associated with Diana. Whenever Meghan appeared wearing pieces linked to Diana's collection, media coverage often intensified dramatically. Supporters viewed such moments as respectful tributes to Harry's late mother. Critics sometimes argued that the symbolism carried broader implications. According to the narrative, each appearance generated renewed discussion about Diana's legacy and how it was being represented in the modern era. What made the situation particularly significant was that the comparisons did not remain limited to fashion or symbolism. They increasingly expanded into media narratives, personal experiences, and public storytelling. According to supporters of the narrative, this evolution allegedly caught the attention of Charles Spencer. Not because he objected to Diana being remembered, but because he reportedly cared deeply about how that remembrance occurred. For decades, Spencer had positioned himself as the protector of Diana's personal legacy. And according to observers, that role naturally made him sensitive to anything that appeared to reshape her story. According to the narrative, concerns allegedly intensified following several high-profile media projects involving Harry and Meghan. Interviews, documentaries, podcasts, and public discussions repeatedly referenced Diana's experiences within the royal family. Supporters of the Sussexes argued that such comparisons were unavoidable because Harry himself frequently connected his mother's experiences to his own concerns. Critics argued that Diana's story was increasingly being used as a framework through which every modern dispute was interpreted. Whether those criticisms were fair remains heavily debated. Nevertheless, according to supporters of the narrative, Charles Spencer was reportedly paying close attention to how these narratives were developing. According to many commentators, one moment proved especially influential: the famous interview with Oprah Winfrey. During and after the broadcast, public discussion frequently returned to Diana. Media outlets referenced her repeatedly. Commentators debated similarities and differences. And audiences around the world were encouraged to view events through the lens of Diana's experiences. Supporters of Meghan argued that these comparisons emerged naturally from the circumstances. Critics argued that they amplified emotional narratives that were impossible to verify fully. Either way, Diana's name remained at the center of the conversation. According to supporters of the story, this growing dependence on Diana-related symbolism allegedly created a dilemma for Charles Spencer. On one hand, he understood why Harry would feel a deep emotional connection to his mother's legacy. On the other hand, supporters of the narrative claim that Spencer reportedly believed Diana's memory should not become permanently intertwined with commercial media projects, public controversies, or modern celebrity branding. Whether he actually expressed those concerns privately remains uncertain. However, within the narrative, this alleged tension became increasingly important as events continued unfolding. What makes the stage of the story particularly fascinating is that nobody was openly confronting anyone. No public feud existed, no official statements were exchanged, and Charles Spencer largely remained silent. Yet according to supporters of the narrative, silence did not mean approval. Observers allegedly began noticing subtle indications that Spencer preferred maintaining a careful distance from certain developments. Those observations fueled speculation, and that speculation soon expanded dramatically. According to many royal commentators, the real turning point allegedly arrived when reports emerged that Harry and Meghan were exploring future media projects connected to Diana's story. The possibility immediately captured public attention. Supporters viewed such projects as opportunities to celebrate Diana's life and introduce her legacy to younger generations. Critics worried that commercial partnerships could blur the line between remembrance and entertainment. According to supporters of the narrative, it was at this moment that Charles Spencer allegedly found himself facing a decision he had managed to avoid for years. Because according to the story, a proposal was reportedly making its way toward Diana's family, one involving documentaries, anniversaries, exclusive access, and unprecedented opportunities to revisit Diana's life. And if the reports were true, Charles Spencer would soon have to decide whether to support the project, remain neutral, or take a position that could place him directly opposite Prince Harry and Meghan Markle for the first time. According to supporters of the narrative, the controversy allegedly reached a decisive turning point when discussions surrounding a major Diana-related media project began moving beyond speculation and into serious planning. For years, Harry and Meghan had built much of their public identity around personal storytelling. Interviews, documentaries, podcasts, and streaming partnerships had become central parts of their post-royal life. According to many commentators, these projects often performed best when they touched upon emotional subjects connected to family, personal struggles, and the legacy of Princess Diana. As a result, supporters of the narrative claim that interest eventually grew around the possibility of creating a major documentary focused specifically on Diana's life and enduring influence. According to the story, the timing appeared ideal. The approaching anniversary of Diana's death was generating renewed public interest. Streaming platforms remained eager for high-profile royal content, and audiences around the world continued demonstrating a powerful fascination with Diana's story. Supporters of the narrative argue that these factors created strong incentives for a project centered on her life, legacy, and continuing impact on future generations. Within the narrative, the idea reportedly attracted significant attention almost immediately. According to many royal observers, the proposal allegedly went beyond a traditional documentary. Supporters of the narrative claim it potentially involved personal archives, family insights, historical materials, and perspectives that could provide viewers with a deeper understanding of Diana than previous productions had offered. Whether such plans ever existed in the form described by commentators remains uncertain. Nevertheless, within the narrative, the possibility generated enormous excitement because it appeared capable of combining two of the most powerful forces in modern royal storytelling, Diana and Harry. What made the situation especially significant was that one individual allegedly stood at the center of any decision involving Diana's private legacy. That individual was Charles Spencer, as the custodian of Althorpe, as Diana's brother, and as the longtime guardian of much of her personal history. Supporters of the narrative argue that his cooperation would be essential for any project seeking access to the most intimate parts of Diana's story. Without him, important doors would remain closed. According to supporters of the story, discussions allegedly began reaching Spencer's circle as interest in the project grew. Reports circulated suggesting that access to family materials, private memories, and locations associated with Diana might be requested. Some commentators described the proposal as an opportunity to honor Diana's life. Others expressed concern that commercial interests could become intertwined with personal family history. According to the narrative, These differing interpretations created a dilemma that Charles Spencer could no longer ignore. According to many observers, this was the moment when years of quiet concern allegedly began crystallizing into a clear decision. Spencer reportedly faced a difficult question. Should Diana's legacy continue being shared through modern media projects? Or should certain aspects of her story remain protected from commercial partnerships? Supporters of the narrative claim that this debate extended far beyond a single documentary. It became a debate about ownership of memory itself. Who decides how Diana is remembered? Who decides which stories are told? And who decides where the boundaries should exist? According to the narrative, pressure surrounding the proposed project allegedly increased because of broader challenges facing Harry and Meghan's media ambitions. Commentators frequently discussed the performance of streaming partnerships, content production agreements, and audience expectations. Supporters of the narrative argue that a major Diana project could potentially attract global attention unlike almost anything else available to the Sussexes. Critics, however, warned that relying too heavily on Diana's story risked creating accusations that her memory was being used as a business asset rather than preserved as a family legacy. What makes this stage of the story particularly dramatic is that Harry allegedly found himself caught between two worlds. On one side stood his wife, his media partnerships, and his vision for the future. On the other stood his mother's family, the people who had known Diana before fame, before royal life, and before global attention transformed her existence forever. According to supporters of the narrative, these competing loyalties created extraordinary tension. Because regardless of which path Harry supported, someone important to him would likely be disappointed. According to many royal commentators, the significance of Charles Spencer's decision extended well beyond the documentary itself. If he approved the project, it would be viewed as a powerful endorsement of Harry and Meghan's approach. If he rejected it, the decision could be interpreted as a public declaration that Diana's family disagreed with the direction being taken. Supporters of the narrative claim that this reality transformed Spencer's response into one of the most anticipated moments in the entire controversy. According to the story, the answer eventually came, and it allegedly stunned those who expected automatic support from Diana's family. Reports began circulating that Charles Spencer had drawn a firm line regarding access to Diana's private legacy. And according to supporters of the narrative, that decision would not only create a crisis for the proposed project, but would also trigger a chain reaction involving Netflix, Prince William, and one of the most painful dilemmas Harry had faced since leaving royal life. According to supporters of the narrative, the situation allegedly reached its most dramatic moment when Charles Spencer finally made his decision. For weeks, speculation had surrounded the proposed Diana project. Royal commentators debated whether Diana's brother would support it. Media outlets discussed the potential impact. And supporters of the narrative argued that many people simply assumed Spencer would eventually cooperate out of loyalty to Prince Harry. After all, Harry was Diana's son. Few individuals had a stronger personal connection to her story. Yet according to the narrative, Charles Spencer reportedly viewed the issue through a very different lens. For him, the question was never about loyalty. It was about stewardship. It was about responsibility. And most importantly, it was about protecting Diana's legacy from becoming something he believed it was never meant to be. According to supporters of the story, Spencer allegedly declined to support the proposal. No dramatic press conference followed, no public argument erupted, and no direct criticism was issued. Yet within the narrative, the message was unmistakable. Certain parts of Diana's story would remain private, certain family archives would remain protected, and certain boundaries would not be crossed. According to many commentators, this alleged decision sent shockwaves through those who expected automatic access to Diana's legacy. The reason was simple. Charles Spencer was not merely another relative offering an opinion. He controlled access to some of the most important locations, records, and family materials associated with Diana's life. Supporters of the narrative argue that his refusal immediately transformed the project's prospects because it removed the possibility of obtaining the type of exclusive family cooperation that would have made the documentary uniquely powerful. What made the situation even more significant was the broader context surrounding Harry and Meghan's media partnerships. According to supporters of the narrative, pressure was allegedly growing to produce major content capable of attracting global attention. Streaming platforms expected results, audiences expected fresh stories, and royal content continued generating strong public interest. Within the narrative, a Diana-focused project reportedly appeared capable of satisfying all of those expectations at once, which made Spencer's alleged rejection especially consequential. According to the story, concerns allegedly emerged almost immediately regarding the future of the project. Without access to family archives, without cooperation from Diana's closest relatives, and without the symbolic endorsement that Spencer's participation would provide, commentators began questioning whether the documentary could achieve the impact originally envisioned. Supporters of the narrative claim that this uncertainty quickly evolved into a larger discussion about the Sussexes' media strategy and their continuing reliance on royal themes. According to many royal observers, another fascinating element soon entered the narrative. Attention shifted toward Prince William. Unlike Harry, William had remained largely silent throughout the controversy. He issued no public statements, he offered no interviews, and he avoided becoming directly involved. Yet supporters of the narrative claim that many commentators interpreted Spencer's alleged decision as broadly consistent with William's own views regarding Diana's legacy. The belief was not necessarily that William orchestrated anything. Rather, that both men allegedly shared similar instincts about protecting Diana's memory. According to supporters of the story, this perceived alignment carried enormous symbolic significance. Charles Spencer represented Diana's family. William represented her future within the monarchy. If both appeared to favor caution regarding commercial projects connected to Diana's life, then observers naturally began wondering whether Harry had become increasingly isolated in his position. Whether that interpretation was fair remains heavily debated. Nevertheless, within the narrative, it became one of the most widely discussed aspects of the controversy. What makes this stage of the story particularly emotional is Harry's alleged position in the middle of it all. On one side stood his wife, his business partnerships, and the future he had spent years building outside the monarchy. On the other stood his mother's brother, the guardian of her private legacy. And according to supporters of the narrative, individuals who believed some parts of Diana's story should remain beyond commercial reach. According to many commentators, this created a dilemma with no easy solution. Any decision risked disappointing someone. Any path forward carried consequences. And every option seemed to deepen existing divisions. According to supporters of the narrative, Spencer's alleged refusal ultimately became far more than a decision about a documentary. It became a statement about ownership, memory, and authority. Who gets to decide how Diana is remembered? Who controls access to her private history? And should family legacy ever become part of a commercial media project? These questions, rather than the documentary itself, allegedly became the true focus of the controversy. According to the story, the fallout from the decision continued spreading through royal circles long afterward. The proposed project allegedly faced uncertainty. Questions about Harry and Meghan's future media direction intensified, and observers increasingly began debating whether reconciliation between different branches of Diana's family had become even more difficult. Yet supporters of the narrative argue that the most important consequences were still ahead. Because once Charles Spencer's position became clear, attention shifted to an even bigger question: whether Harry could continue balancing loyalty to Meghan, loyalty to Diana's memory, and loyalty to the family connections that had shaped his life long before he ever met Meghan Markle. According to supporters of the narrative, the most emotional part of this entire controversy was never the proposed documentary, the reported refusal, or even the debate surrounding Diana's legacy. Instead, it was the position in which Prince Harry allegedly found himself once the situation reached its conclusion. For years, Harry had spoken openly about the profound influence his mother continues to have on his life. He has frequently described Diana as a guiding presence, a source of inspiration, and a reminder of the values he wishes to uphold. Yet according to many commentators, the events described throughout this narrative allegedly forced him to confront a difficult reality. The people closest to Diana's memory did not necessarily agree on how that memory should be preserved. According to the story, Harry found himself standing between two very different visions of Diana's legacy. On one side stood Meghan, modern media projects, and the belief that Diana's story still contains lessons that deserve to reach new audiences. On the other stood Charles Spencer, and those who allegedly believe certain parts of Diana's life should remain protected from commercial partnerships and public reinterpretation. Supporters of the narrative argue that neither position was necessarily motivated by bad intentions. Both claim to honor Diana, both claim to respect her memory, and both claim to be acting in her best interests. The disagreement centered on method rather than motive. According to many royal commentators, this is precisely why the controversy generated such intense public interest. Questions about money, documentaries, and streaming platforms are relatively straightforward. Questions about memory, legacy, and family responsibility are far more complicated. Supporters of the narrative argue that once those deeper questions entered the discussion, the documentary itself became almost secondary. The real debate was about who gets to decide how history is remembered and who has the authority to define the legacy of one of the most beloved figures in modern royal history. What makes this stage of the story particularly fascinating is the role allegedly played by Prince William. Throughout the controversy, William reportedly remained silent. No interviews, no public criticism, and no direct involvement. Yet according to supporters of the narrative, many observers interpreted Charles Spencer's reported position as broadly aligned with William's own instincts regarding Diana's memory. Not because the two men coordinated their actions, but because they allegedly shared similar concerns about preserving Diana's private legacy. Within the narrative, this perception created a striking image. Diana's brother on one side, Diana's eldest son on the other, and Harry standing somewhere in between. According to supporters of the story, this dynamic intensified ongoing questions about reconciliation. Could the divisions that emerged over recent years eventually be repaired? Could Harry rebuild stronger relationships with members of both his royal family and Diana's family? Or had the competing visions become too different to reconcile completely? These questions remain unanswered. Yet according to many commentators, they continue shaping public discussion about the future of the Sussexes and their relationship with both sides of Harry's family. According to the narrative, the most important lesson involves Diana herself. Nearly 3 decades after her death, her influence remains extraordinary, her memory remains powerful, and her legacy remains capable of shaping major conversations across continents. Few public figures continue generating such emotional responses so many years later. Supporters of the narrative argue that this enduring influence explains why debates involving Diana rarely remain simple. They touch on family, history, identity, and deeply personal emotions. According to many royal observers, the controversy ultimately demonstrates that Diana's legacy belongs to multiple groups simultaneously. It belongs to her sons, it belongs to the Spencer family, it belongs to the historical record, and in a broader sense, it belongs to the millions of people around the world who continue admiring her decades later. Because of that reality, disagreements about how her story should be told are almost inevitable. Different people will always hold different views about the best way to preserve her memory. What makes the ending especially powerful is that it leaves one final question hanging in the air. Can a legacy ever truly belong to one person? Or does it eventually become something larger than any individual can control? According to supporters of the narrative, that question sits at the heart of this entire story. Not the headlines, not the rumors, and not the controversy, but the challenge of balancing remembrance with responsibility, privacy with public interest, and family loyalty with modern media realities. According to many commentators, the answer may never be fully agreed upon. Yet the fact that these debates continue today demonstrates just how significant Diana remains to people around the world. Whether viewed through the eyes of Charles Spencer, Prince William, Prince Harry, or Meghan Markle, one reality remains undeniable. Diana's story still matters, and her legacy continues influencing the future long after her lifetime ended. What do you think? Should Diana's legacy be shared through modern documentaries and media projects so new generations can learn her story, or should certain parts of her life remain protected by family members who knew her best? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, Charles Spencer, and the evolving legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.